Keanu Reeves sat in the back seat of a black car, the night outside heavy with rain.
Yes.
The city lights blurred through the glass as drops slid down the window. He was tired, not from filming or travel, but from something heavier, something he never spoke about in interviews. He wanted silence. Just a moment where the world could stop demanding things from him. But the silence broke in the most unexpected way. A small boy's voice cut through the hum of the rain. It was sharp, trembling, but strong enough to make Keanu lift his head. "Shut up," the boy said. Keanu froze. Those words weren't spoken with arrogance. They carried pain, almost like the boy had swallowed something too heavy for his young chest. He turned his eyes and saw the boy sitting across from him, his skin dark, his clothes damp from the storm, and his small hands clenched as if holding on to invisible ropes. Beside him sat a woman, his mother, her head bowed, her eyes red, her clothes soaked through. Keanu's driver glanced back in the mirror, unsure if he should interfere, but Keanu lifted his hand slowly. "It's all right," Keanu whispered. The boy's chest rose and fell quickly. His tiny frame trembled, but his gaze did not move. Keanu saw something there. He recognized defiance, born not from rebellion, but from survival. "Why did you tell me to shut up?" Keanu asked gently. The boy blinked, and his lips trembled before he spoke again. "Because every time you rich people talk, it means trouble for us. You don't understand." The mother gasped and tried to hush her son, but Keanu shook his head. His voice stayed calm, steady, like a bridge built in the storm. "No, let him speak," he said softly. The boy's eyes welled up, and his words poured out, raw and unfiltered. "You don't know what it's like to hear your mom cry every night because she doesn't know how to feed you. You don't know what it's like to have people look at you like you don't matter. So shut up if you're just going to say something nice and then forget us tomorrow." The car grew quiet, except for the steady beat of rain. Keanu felt those words cut through him deeper than any critic's review, deeper than any wound from the past. He had spent years giving away money quietly, helping strangers without cameras around. Yet here was this child telling him he was still part of the same world that ignored them. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving the boy. "You're right," he said softly. "I don't know your pain, but I want to listen. I promise I won't forget you tomorrow." The boy shook his head, his voice cracking. "People always say that," the mother whispered. "I'm sorry." "Sir, he didn't mean it. He's just tired. He's hungry." Her voice broke, and her hands covered her face. Keanu felt his heart tighten. The tiredness in him vanished. In its place rose a fire, the same fire he once carried when he too was just a boy learning how cruel the world could be. He remembered the nights he had slept on floors, the tragedies that had marked his life, his father leaving, the friends he lost too early, the grief that never truly left. He looked at the boy and thought, maybe fate had placed this child in front of him tonight for a reason. The driver asked softly, "Sir, should I keep going?" Keanu looked out the window. The car was passing a row of dimly lit streets, each one filled with people hiding under broken umbrellas, waiting for rain to ease. He turned back, his eyes set with quiet resolve. "No," Keanu said. "Stop the car." The brakes hissed against wet pavement. The boy looked at him with confusion, suspicion still in his eyes. The mother shook her head, unsure if they should stay or leave. Keanu leaned closer, his voice carrying a strange mix of gentleness and unshakable strength. "Tonight doesn't end like this," said the boy, narrowed his eyes. "What do you mean?" Keanu placed a hand over his chest. "I mean, I can't let your words just pass me by. You told me to shut up because you thought I wouldn't care. But I do. I can't fix the world, but maybe I can start by fixing this moment." The mother began to cry again, silently, because hope was dangerous when you had learned to live without it. The boy's lips trembled, caught between disbelief and the longing that every child carried deep down, the longing for someone to finally prove their words true. The rain fell harder outside. But inside the car, something powerful had begun. A silence not of emptiness, but of suspense, as if the air itself waited to see what would happen next. Keanu knew this night was about to change not only the boy's life, but his own. Asterisk, the car sat quietly by the curb, rain hammering the roof, like restless fingers. The driver looked uncertain, glancing back at Keanu, waiting for instructions. The boy sat stiffly, his jaw set, his small fists still clenched in silent protest. His mother wiped her face with the back of her hand. Embarrassed and broken, Keanu leaned forward, his dark eyes calm but determined. "What are your names?" he asked softly. The mother hesitated. She looked at him, then at her son, unsure if she could trust him. Finally, in a voice no louder than a whisper, she said, "I'm Angela, and this is my son, Elijah." The boy shifted uncomfortably when his name was spoken, as if it exposed him, but Keanu repeated it gently, almost like a promise. "Elijah." There was power in the way he said it, not like a celebrity talking down, but like a man acknowledging another human being. The boy's hard expression flickered for just a moment, but his suspicion quickly returned. "Where are you going tonight?" Keanu asked. Angela's voice cracked. We don't have anywhere. We were staying at a shelter, but it closed early because of the storm. I was trying to find a bus stop when your driver stopped the car." Keanu's chest ached. He looked at Elijah, who sat close to his mother, his body like a small shield. Keanu recognized that instinct. When the world hurt you enough, you learned to protect the only thing you had left. Keanu took a deep breath. "You're not going back into the rain," he said firmly. Angela shook her head quickly. "Sir, please, don't want your pity. We've had people give us words before. They feel sorry for a moment, but tomorrow we're invisible again. Can't let my son get his hopes up for nothing." Her words stung, not because they were cruel, but because they were honest. Keanu nodded slowly. "I understand, but I don't give empty promises." Elijah narrowed his eyes. "Then prove it." For the first time since they entered the car, Keanu smiled just slightly. "All right," he said. "I will." He turned to the driver. "Take us to the old diner on 7th Street. It's open all night." The driver hesitated, surprised, but nodded and pulled back onto the wet road. The car rolled through the storm, passing darkened shops and shuttered windows, until the neon glow of the diner flickered through the rain. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the smell of coffee and frying food. The bell above the door rang as they entered, drawing curious looks from the few customers scattered in booths. Keanu's face was familiar to nearly everyone, but tonight he didn't carry the aura of a movie star. He walked in quietly, guiding Angela and Elijah to a corner booth as if they were the most important people in the room. A waitress came over, her eyes widening when she recognized him. "Mr. Reeves," she began, but Keanu cut her off gently. "Tonight I'm just Keanu," he said softly. "Can we have menus, please?" She nodded quickly, flustered but respectful. Soon, steaming plates of food arrived: burgers, fries, pancakes, and hot chocolate with extra cream for Elijah. Angela stared at the food, her hands trembling. "Eat," Keanu encouraged softly. "You need it." Elijah looked at the plate, then at Keanu, suspicious still. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. Keanu leaned back, his voice calm. "'Cause once a long time ago, I wished someone would do the same for me." The boy frowned, confused. "For you? But you're famous? Rich." Keanu's eyes grew distant for a moment. "Money doesn't erase pain, Elijah. It doesn't erase nights when you feel alone. It doesn't erase losing people you love. I know what it feels like to carry hurt and pretend you're strong when inside, you're tired." Elijah's small shoulders stiffened. His lips parted slightly, but no words came. Keanu had touched something in him that he couldn't hide behind anger. Angela whispered, her voice breaking. "No one has ever sat with us like this. No one has ever looked at us like we mattered." Keanu leaned forward, his hands resting on the table. "You matter," he said simply. The words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Angela's tears slipped down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from shame. Elijah picked up his fork slowly and began to eat, his eyes never leaving Keanu. Minutes turned into an hour as they sat together. Angela shared pieces of her story in fragments: how she had lost her job, how the bills piled up, how friends disappeared. When times grew hard, Keanu listened without interruption, his gaze steady, his heart heavy but open. Elijah finally whispered, almost too softly to hear, "Do you really mean it? It's that you won't forget us tomorrow?" Keanu nodded, his voice steady. "I swear, Elijah, this is only the beginning." The boy looked at him, still unsure. Somewhere in his eyes a small light began to flicker. Outside the storm raged on, but inside the diner, something unshakable had started, a bond formed not of pity, but of recognition one soul seeing. Another Keanu didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing for certain. He would not let this night fade into memory. The diner lights glowed against the storm outside, but the warmth inside could not erase the heaviness of what Keanu had just promised. He sat quietly across from Angela and Elijah, watching them eat as though every bite was a fight against hunger that had lived in their bones for too long. The waitress came by, refilled their cups, and whispered to Keanu, "You've got a kind heart." He only nodded, because words like that never sat well with him. He wasn't doing this for praise. He was doing it because something in Elijah's voiced the defiance. The pain had struck deeper than anything he could ignore. Angela set her fork down, her hand still trembling. "Thank you," she said softly, "but I need to be honest. After this, we'll still have no home, no safety, and no way forward." Her words were not meant to hurt, they were truth, raw and sharp. Keanu didn't flinch. He leaned forward, his voice steady. "Then tomorrow we begin something different. You won't face it alone." Elijah looked up quickly, his young eyes still clouded with doubt. "You're saying that now, because we're here?" "But when you walk out that door, you'll forget us." Keanu shook his head slowly. "No, Elijah. You told me to prove it." "I will." He paused, then added, "But I'll need you both to trust me, even just a little." Trust. It was a word easier spoken than lived. Angela lowered her eyes, fear and hope clashing within her. She wanted to believe, but she had been let down too many times by people who promised light and left her in darkness. Suddenly, the diner door opened with a violent slam of wind and rain. Two men stumbled in, laughing loudly, their voices echoing. One of them spotted Keanu and stopped in his tracks. "Hey, isn't that Keanu Reeves?" The man's voice carried across the room. His friend turned, his eyes widening. "No way it is." They hurried over, their excitement spilling into the booth. "Man, can we get a photo? An autograph?" "This is unreal." Keanu smiled politely, but his hand lifted gently. "Not tonight, guys. I'm spending time with friends." The men glanced at Angela and Elijah, their smiles faltering. One of them whispered to the other, "Friends? Doesn't look like it." Then he laughed under his breath. Elijah's small fists tightened, his jaw hardening. Keanu noticed and placed a calming hand on the table. "Ignore them," he said softly. But Elijah's voice burst out before he could stop it. "Don't laugh at my mom." The men blinked, surprised. One of them chuckled awkwardly. "Hey kid, relax. We're not trying to." Keanu stood. His tall frame cast a shadow over the booth. His voice was low, but carried weight. He said, "Don't laugh at his mom." The diner grew silent. Even the clinking of dishes in the kitchen stopped for a moment. The men shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. Finally, they muttered an apology and retreated to the counter. Keanu sat back down, his expression softening as he turned to Elijah. "You were brave to speak up," he said gently. "But remember, strength isn't always about fighting. Sometimes it's about protecting without losing yourself." Elijah swallowed hard, still shaken, but Keanu's words sank into him like seeds into soil. The rest of the meal passed more quietly. When it was done, Keanu paid the bill, leaving a generous tip for the waitress. Then he turned to Angela and Elijah. "Come with me," he said simply. They stepped back out into the storm, but this time, the rain didn't feel as cruel. The car pulled up and they climbed inside. Keanu gave the driver a new destination. As the car wound through the city streets, Elijah finally asked, "Where are we going?" Keanu looked at him and answered with quiet certainty, "To a place where you'll be safe tonight." The car stopped outside a modest but clean hotel. Keanu guided them inside, speaking to the receptionist with calm authority. Within minutes, a room key was in Angela's hand. Her voice shook as she whispered, "I don't know how to thank you." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "Don't thank me. Just rest. Tomorrow, we start again." Elijah stood in the doorway of the hotel room, staring at Keanu. Suspicion still lingered, but beneath it was something new, a fragile thread of, "Hope you really won't forget?" the boy asked. Keanu crouched down, his eyes level with Elijah's. "I give you my word." Elijah's lips pressed together, and for the first time, he gave a small nod. As the door closed, Keanu stood in the hallway, rainwater still dripping from his coat. His heart was heavy, but there was also a strange lightness, like he had stepped onto a path he was meant to follow. What he didn't know was that this path would soon test him in ways he had never expected. Because helping Angela and Elijah would not be as simple as meals and shelter. It would mean facing the very shadows of a system built to keep people like them invisible. And Keanu had just made himself their shield. Asterisk. The hotel hallway was silent as Keanu walked toward the exit. Outside, the storm had not softened, roared louder, as if the world itself knew something had shifted. He pulled his coat tighter, his mind heavy with thoughts. Promises were easy to make, but keeping them required more than good intentions. Stepped into the rain, letting it soak his hair and face. He had kept his word for tonight. Angela and Elijah had a warm bed and food in their stomachs. But tomorrow would come quickly, and with it the weight of their reality. The next morning, Keanu returned to the hotel. He found Angela and Elijah sitting quietly in the lobby. Angela looked worn, her eyes swollen from a lifetime of sleepless nights. Elijah clutched a small backpack, the straps nearly frayed. They both stood when they saw him, their faces caught between relief and doubt. "Good morning," Keanu said softly. "Did you rest?" Angela nodded faintly. "Better than we have in months." Her voice carried gratitude, but also fear. She added quickly, "But Keanu, you don't need to do more. We can't let you carry our burden." Keanu shook his head. "I didn't come here to feel good about myself. I came here because your son reminded me of something I had forgotten, that sometimes silence is the cruelest thing we can give to people in pain." "I won't stay silent." Elijah looked at him sharply. "Then what now?" Keanu crouched down again, meeting the boy's gaze. "Now we look for something permanent, not just a meal, not just a bed for one night, something real." But the world rarely opened its doors so easily. The first step was finding Angela work. She had experience as a caretaker, but the places Keanu called gave cold answers. "Sorry, no openings," one voice said. Another added, "We require stable housing first." The circle of rejection spun endlessly. No job without a home. No home without a job. Keanu felt frustration burn in his chest. He was a man who had built his life on resilience, who had clawed through grief and emptiness. But here he was, facing walls built not of stone, but of indifference. As the hours passed, Angela grew quieter, shame pressing down on her. Elijah watched silently, his eyes dark with the knowledge that promises often died in the light of day. Finally, "Hello," Keanu suggested they stop for lunch. They walked together down a crowded street, drawing curious looks from passers-by. Some whispered, recognizing him. Others stared at Angela and Elijah with the cold eyes of judgment, as if their poverty was their crime. Keanu noticed. Cut into him like a blade. Inside the small cafe, Angela whispered, "This is why I never let myself hope. The world doesn't want us to rise. It wants us to stay where we are, out of sight." Keanu leaned across the table. "Then we won't stay out of sight. If the world won't open doors, I'll break them open." Before Angela could reply, a man at the next table leaned over. He was well-dressed, his tone sharp. "Mr. Reeves," he said, "with all respect, you're wasting your time. People like them, they'll just drag you down. Help today, and they'll need you tomorrow again. It never ends." Angela lowered her head, humiliated. Elijah's fists clenched, but this time he said nothing. Keanu turned to the man, his voice calm but unshakable. Maybe it never ends. Maybe that's the point. Kindness isn't something you do once and walk away. It's a fight you choose every day. The man scoffed and returned to his meal. But Keanu saw Elijah watching him, a flicker of something. New in the boy's eyes dashed respect. After lunch, Keanu made another call, this time to a friend who managed a small community center. Within an hour, they stood inside the old brick building, where children played and volunteers worked. The manager, a kind woman named Maria, listened to Angela's story. "We don't have much," she admitted, "but we can start. We can offer shelter for a few weeks, and we can help with training for work." Angela's hands trembled. Tears slipped down her face. I don't know what to say." Keanu placed a hand on her shoulder. "Say yes. Take this step. The rest we'll face together." For the first time, Angela nodded without hesitation. That night, Elijah sat on a small cot at the community center, staring at Keanu. "You didn't forget," he whispered. Keanu smiled faintly. "I told you I wouldn't." But even as those words settled, a shadow lingered in Keanu's mind. Because promises like this didn't just touch lives, they attracted attention. Not everyone liked seeing walls broken, especially people who built those walls, and soon, now that attention would come crashing down on them. The community center buzzed with small sounds of life, children laughing in the playroom, footsteps echoing in the hallway, the faint hum of old lights above. For Angela and Elijah, it was the first time in months that the night didn't feel like an enemy. They had a roof, warm meals, and people who treated them with dignity. But outside those walls, the world was still waiting. Sharp and unforgiving, Keanu stayed close, visiting daily, checking in as if they were family. He helped Angela sign up. For training programs, he sat with Elijah during homework sessions, and he shared stories from his own childhood, how loss and hardship had shaped him, how pain didn't define a person, but how they chose to stand after it did. Elijah listened carefully, though he still tested Keanu. "You'll get tired," he said one evening. "People always do. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but one day." Keanu looked at him, his expression steady. "Then I'll keep showing up until you believe otherwise." But as the days passed, not everyone looked at Keanu's actions with kindness. Whispers began in the city. Reporters caught wind of him spending time at the community center. Photographs appeared online, Keanu sitting beside Angela and Elijah, carrying boxes of supplies, walking through the shelter halls. Headlines followed. "Is Keanu Reeves playing hero?" "Actor supports homeless mother and child publicity stunt, or real kindness?" The media twisted the story into entertainment. Some praised him, but others mocked, claiming he was chasing attention. Keanu ignored the noise, but Angela couldn't. "They're talking about us like we're objects," she whispered one night, tears brimming in her eyes, "like our pain is a story for strangers to judge." Keanu's voice was firm. "You're not an object, Angela. You're not a headline. You're a human being, and no one gets to take that from you." But trouble was only beginning. A week later, the community center's manager, Maria, approached Keanu with worry. "We received a call," she said quietly. "A donor threatened to pull funding if we keep attracting attention. They don't like the spotlight this has brought." Keanu's jaw tightened. "So they want you to choose money over people?" Ria's eyes filled with sorrow. "We survive on donations. If they pull out, we may lose half our programs." "I don't know how long we can hold on." Keanu felt anger burn through him, but he forced his voice calm. "I'll cover the funding. No child, no family here will be punished because of me." But it wasn't only about money. The system was built on people staying quiet, staying invisible. God. And Keanu had disrupted that silence. Days later, as he walked Elijah home from school, a black car slowed beside them. The tinted window rolled down, revealing a man in a sharp suit. "Mr. Reeves," the man said smoothly, "a word of advice. Your generosity is admirable, but meddling in places you don't understand will only end badly for everyone." Elijah stiffened, gripping Keanu's arm. Keanu's eyes narrowed. "Are you threatening me?" The man smiled thinly. "I'm warning you. Step back before this gets messy. The window rolled up, and the car sped away. Elijah's voice shook. Who was that? Keanu placed a hand on his shoulder. Someone afraid of change. Someone who wants you to believe you don't matter. Elijah swallowed hard, his eyes wide. And what if he makes you stop? Keanu crouched, his gaze steady. Nothing can make me stop. Not him, not anyone. But inside, Keanu knew the fight had grown bigger than he expected. This wasn't just about helping a mother and child anymore. It was about standing against forces that thrived on silence and fear. That night, Angela nearly broke. Maybe we should disappear again, she whispered. Before we bring danger to you. Before this gets worse, Keanu shook his head firmly. No, running keeps their power alive. Standing together takes it away. He looked at Elijah, whose young eyes carried both fear and fire. Remember what you told me the first night? You said I didn't understand? You were right. But I'm learning. I won't shut up. Not now. Not ever. The storm outside pounded harder against the windows, as if the city itself warned them of the battles ahead. Asterisk, the storm outside had not slowed. And neither had the storm inside Keanu's heart. Every day the weight grew heavier. Media cameras outside the community center. Whispers from powerful voices telling him to step back, and the shadow of that black car's warning lingering in the back of his mind.
Oh.
But every time he saw Elijah's eyes, filled with defiance, yet slowly learning trust, he knew he could not retreat. One evening, the community center hosted a meeting for families. The room was filled with tired faces, people who carried the same invisible scars as Angela and Elijah. Keanu stood at the back, quietly watching, when Maria, the manager, pulled him aside. "They're cutting us off," she said, her voice trembling. "Two major donors have already left. They said they don't want to be part of controversy. If we don't find another way, we'll have to close within weeks." Keanu's stomach twisted. He had promised Elijah a new beginning. But what good was one man against a system that thrived on keeping people small? He stepped into the center of the room. All eyes turned to him, not as an actor, not as a star, but as a man standing among them. His voice was calm, but carried the strength of conviction. "I know you've been told you don't matter," Keanu said softly. "I know you've been made to feel invisible. But I promise you this, you are seen. You are heard. And if the world tries to close its doors, we will build new ones." For a moment, silence hung heavy. Then Elijah stood from his chair, his small voice trembling but strong enough to carry. "He's not lying," the boy said. "He didn't forget us. He kept his word. If he can fight for us, maybe we can fight too." The room stirred, a spark of energy moving through tired hearts. In the days that followed, Keanu used his voice not in interviews or red carpets, but in small rooms filled with people who had been silenced too long. He helped organize food, spoke with volunteers, and even stepped into city council meetings, demanding attention for shelters and families. His presence could not be ignored, and slowly, stories began to change. The media no longer painted Angela and Elijah as props in a pity tale. They began to see them as symbols of resilience, of hope. But the resistance came too. Angry letters, veiled threats, and even attempts to smear Angela's past. One night she broke down in tears. "They're digging into everything I've ever done wrong. They want to prove I don't deserve this chance." Keanu held her hands firmly. "We all make mistakes. But your worth is not measured by your past. It's measured by the fight you carry in the present. Don't let them steal that from you." Elijah stood silently beside his mother, his small hand slipping into hers. For the first time, his eyes did not carry suspicion. They carried pride. Weeks passed, and the community center, instead of closing, grew stronger. Donations poured in, not from the wealthy who wanted control, but from ordinary people who heard the story and refused to stay silent. One evening, as the sun broke through the clouds after days of rain, Elijah ran up to Keanu, breathless. "Hey, got an award at school," he said, holding out a small certificate. "For writing an essay, I wrote about the night I told you to shut up." Keanu knelt, his voice soft. "And what did you write?" Elijah grinned faintly. a light Keanu had not seen before. I wrote that sometimes when you tell someone to shut up, they don't. Sometimes they listen instead. And that can change everything. Keanu's throat tightened. He pulled the boy into his arms, holding him close. It's the weight of months lifting in that single moment. Angela stood nearby, her eyes shining with tears. But this time, not of despair, of gratitude, of hope. That night, as Keanu walked alone under a sky finally clear of storms, he realized something. He had stepped into that car expecting silence, but instead, he had been given a voice, one small, defiant voice that had reminded him of who he truly was. And because of that voice, lives had changed. Not just Angela's, not just Elijah's, but his own.